Hello and welcome to the Mindful Men podcast, a show inspiring men to be mindful about their lives. Each week, we'll dive into a range of topics that matter to men and hear from everyday people doing extraordinary things. So if you love the show, please give it a 5-star rating and share it with your mates. Now, before we get into this week's episode, please note that some of the content may trigger you. And if this happens, please reach out to your support networks. It's really important. If you can't get enough of Mindful Men, head over to our website. It's www.mindful-men.com.au. Find the show notes and the links to our socials there. But for now, sit back, relax, and let's get mindful. G'day guys, and welcome to another episode of the Mindful Men podcast. I'm your host, Simon Rinnie, and today we're getting mindful about identity, and in particular, life as a trans man. And joining me for today's discussion, I've got Carlos Munez from England. How are you going, Carlos?
Yeah, hi. I'm all good. Thank you very much. Cheers for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Really excited for you to come onto this show and talk about identity, actually, because it is a topic that I'm really interested in and to explore. And I always believe that mindfulness is more than just meditation and being grateful for things. It's actually tuning into who we really are, that true, authentic version of ourselves, and expressing that in whatever way works for us. So really keen to hear your story about life as a trans man. But to introduce you to my audience, you are a husband, you're a dad, you're a trans man, and you've got this amazing TEDx speech where you talk about adversity and discovery and acceptance of true identity, which I'll put the link in the show notes for everybody to check out right after they've listened to this episode. So thanks so much for coming onto the show. But before we get started, I'd love for you to help us understand what life as a trans man is. What is a trans man?
Yeah, so I am transgender, so that means that I was born a female. When I was born, I was assigned a sex of female. Being transgender basically means that I don't identify as that. I identify as a male. So I identify as the opposite sex, or for some people who are transgender, they identify as non-binary.
Thanks so much for sharing that. And so I guess, where does your story start? Like there's pivotal moments in our lives where we start to question our identities and true self. Where does your story start?
For me, it started from my earliest memories. As far back as I can remember, I was very mindful and very aware of what my identity was within my gender. So when people would refer to me as female, or my name that I was given, it made me feel a certain way. The clothes that I was put in, the hairstyle I had, and the way people treated me as a female, all those little things sort of built up to kind of, it's not just one thing that I feel uncomfortable with. There was all things, and it was all pointing to my gender that they were referring to me as. So that just grew over the years to many other different social situations. But as a child, yeah, it was all about play. It was all about what you were watching on TV, how you appeared, and how people would kind of communicate with you.
Just thinking about the clothing piece, I remember when our son was born, for example, and we wanted him to grow into whatever identity he wanted to be. But when we went to the shops, all we found was pink clothes for girls, blue clothes for boys. And we were looking for more the neutral stuff to let him explore whatever colours he liked. Like as a young child, which was quite young from what I understand from your story, and maybe your parents give you these clothes to wear and you disagreed with that, like what did you do? Did it come out in your behaviour? Did you say something, or did you just bottle it up like most guys did and put those clothes on?
Yeah, so I was expressive about what I didn't want to wear, and I was quite happy to express that I did want to wear like jeans and a t-shirt, but I never came out and sort of said I want to be a boy. That was almost like a step too far. I was probably 5 when I was having these kind of thoughts that I can remember, and I think to be 5 and actually come up with the terminology of being transgender, I wasn't quite there yet. But I think I knew that I wanted to be a boy probably when I was maybe 6 or 7. So my earliest memories were kind of just, it didn't really have a name for it, but it was coming out in all these different facets of my life. Like I said, my clothes were very masculine that I wanted to wear, and it just made me feel comfortable in my own skin. It felt like totally uncomfortable if I was to be put in a dress. So I would negotiate when I was slightly older. If I went to a wedding and I had to wear a dress, I'd wear a dress for like that 1 hour where you have to stand and be at the altar and look pretty. And then my mum would let me change into what I wanted to wear. And that kind of negotiation just went on throughout the years to the point where my mum realised that negotiating wasn't actually making me happy, and I was able to just wear what I wanted to wear. as I got a bit older.
Yeah. You mentioned as you got around 7 or so that you knew that you wanted to be a boy. Did you express that to your parents? Like, how did those conversations start? Or again, does that bottle up until later on in life?
Yeah, it bottles up. It was almost impossible to not express what I wanted to wear, that I wanted to play football, those kind of things. The actual coming out bit didn't happen for me until I was in my teens. It was more to do with, I think, shame and the fact that I wasn't worried that they weren't going to love me, because I came from a very loving home. My mum was very supportive of other aspects of my identity and very kind of keen to let me explore whatever made me happy. She didn't sort of push anything on me to be more male or to be more female. She just let me be who I wanted to be. But I think it's the terminology. So acknowledging that I wanted to be a boy didn't really come, like I said, until I was sort of 6 or 7, and then it kind of then turned into, well, changing gender's the whole different thing to just kind of saying I want to be a boy. So I don't think I was maybe brave enough. There wasn't any representation, so I couldn't really say, other than watching movies like Mrs. Doubtfire, which was a comedy. It wasn't really something you kind of could say I want to be like that, because it wasn't really something I related to. But at the same time, probably was the closest relation to something growing up in a weird way. So yeah, there was that. There was probably Mulan is another one where she's a Disney story where she's being a male. Again, it's not really the same, but it's similar. So I was kind of clutching at straws about how to kind of express how I felt. And there was nothing out there that I could say to my mum, this is what I am. That person over there is a carbon copy of how I feel. They're expressing it far better than I am. This is what I want to be. As a child, you kind of need that kind of as a role model, essentially. I didn't have that.
You mentioned shame, and that's a pretty powerful word. And I think that's a lot of the reason why guys do bottle stuff up is shame, or the fear of what's going to happen if they express how they feel. Like, where do you feel like that shame came from?
I think it was because I had maybe struggles with my bullying and other things that had gone on in our family life, that we were in a really good place by the time I was sort of 5 or 6. Things were in a really good place, and there was lots of good things going on around me. Lots of happy memories were being made. It was kind of, if I was to say that I wanted to be a boy, what would that do? Would that just blow everything out of the water? Would maybe not my mum, but other people in the family, what would they think? Because me and my mum were incredibly close, and I knew she would always be okay with that. But everybody else outside that sphere, you're kind of a bit conscious of. Maybe as a child you shouldn't be, but I was very self-aware, probably because of the gender identity that I was sort of experiencing. I was very aware that repercussions of me saying something so, I guess, drastic at that time in my head, I'd made it a really big thing, what that would do. So my kind of plan as the years went on, my kind of plan was kind of like, well, I'll wait till everybody in my life does love me, as either gone or, I've actively chosen to just remove myself from. And then when it's just me and I can only have to worry about myself, then maybe I can start to turn and look to, like, well, I want to be male. How do I do that? I didn't know the NHS existed. I just thought I'd have to pay for it. So I was kind of thinking about, well, what is my future going to look like? And it just was very, very bleak of, well, I'm never going to be a boy. So part of it was kind of like, so shameful that I hate even think that. And the other half was kind of, well, it's never even going to happen anyway. So stop thinking it, Carlos. Stop thinking it. Just shut it down. It's just never going to happen for you. So it was kind of like a weird cycle that I was going in, where you really, really need something to live, to survive. But at the same time, like, if you never think you're going to get something because it doesn't exist and you don't know what it looks like, then how do I know? There was no way to get that. So it was just, a weird cycle that I was in my head. It didn't take me to some very good places.
In your TEDx talk, you talk about life in chapters. And I feel like this is a big, huge chapter of your life. But you have another one that's tied up with identity as well, which I wanted to touch on as well, because it impacts us as children and then as we become adults as well, is that you were adopted and you were born in Peru. And you mentioned that your mum and you had a very close relationship. So I'm interested to hear how that kind of interplays in as well. Like, how young were you when you were adopted? And then I guess also that aspect of identity too. How did that play into this?
Sure. So I was adopted as a baby. I was 8 months old when I came to England. So tiny baby, really. I don't have any recollection of being in Peru before I was adopted. And with that, my mum made a very conscious decision to make sure that I grew up knowing my story. There was no lies, there was no kind of deception or such. It was all very much, your mum couldn't keep you. The country we were living in at the time was dangerous. She was doing what she thought was the right thing to do. And I grew up having a lot of compassion and respect for her for doing that, because it wouldn't have been an easy thing to do. Certainly as a parent now, I can appreciate even more so what she would have gone through to make that decision. So my story started about, being like Paddington Bear and coming from Peru, stories I was told. My home had like Peruvian artwork in. So we kind of like introduced bits of my culture and part of my story. So I was very proud that I was from Peru. I was never really ashamed about that aspect. I had quite a good relationship with my country and what that meant and that part of my identity. And then that just grew as I got older, and the door was open for me to ask questions as I got older about my adoption. And yeah, we would have incidental conversations about that as I grew up. So in primary school, I may have said in school, "Oh, I have brothers and sisters in Peru." My peers in school would say, "No, you don't. What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "No, I do." And so I was very like happy to talk about it, but other people, it totally confused them. So yeah, I had a good relationship with my adoption, and that's just grown with me, I think, alongside the identity with my gender. That has grown with me in a positive way. Because I had a good relationship with it, I never really wanted to explore anything further. I was quite content with it.
I'm interested, like, even though you say it's quite positive, did you feel a sense of rejection from your birth mother? I'm interested in particular, like the shame around being trans. Did you feel like if you shared that might open the door to further rejection in your life?
That's an interesting question. So there was probably an aspect when I was a teenager, and I often would think, and I met my now wife when we were teenagers. She was obviously very curious about my history, so we'd talk about it, and she'd probably hear more than my mum would say, what would they make of you, if you found them and they realized you were transgender. My response usually was, well, it's just I'm never going to find them. They live very rurally. I'm never going to find them, so it's never going to be an issue. I think part of the reason why I sort of batted that off was probably because, there was probably an aspect of these are going to be uneducated people, right? To think people are educated would have more of an understanding. And so they're probably never going to understand it. And so part of me was sort of like, well, that's a kind of, if there's a pros and cons list, that's a con on the list. But actually, to give them entire credit, when I did find them after the first meeting, we had a second meeting with a translator who was fully geared up to talk about my identity with them. And that couldn't have gone any better, because the very first things they said was, doesn't matter who you are, we found you and we love you. And that was just like, the people who are uneducated, that don't really need to, it didn't matter to them what my gender was. It just mattered that I was happy in my own skin. And for people who live in the foothills of the Andes Mountains that can grasp that concept and just take people as humans was just the most relieving thing. And I think you're right, there probably was an aspect, it was so relieving for me, such a relief, that there was definitely a part of it, of the build up to, well, if I do find them, what on earth am I going to tell them?
You raise an interesting point there, because when we're holding on to something that can be a deep secret, like we assume what other people are going to say. And I think that feeds into the mental health cycle of, I can't say this, I can't share about this because I'm worried what they're going to say. But often that assumption is just made up in our head, and people can be, not always, but can be quite accepting of difference, which is a really powerful thing. And I can imagine it felt like a weight lifted off your shoulders when that happened.
Yeah, I think I spent, when I had come out to my mum and our family friends, and obviously my wife, we kind of felt like that was going to be it. And I could take a breath of fresh air and just go, right, okay, I've come out, that's it. But it never really ends, because then we were getting married, and then there were other family friends, and we got married abroad. So it was like, well, if they see my scars, are they going to ask questions? So we better tell those people, just because we want the wedding to go well. And everyone has these wedding jitters and bridezillas and stuff. We're like, let's cover all bases. I've got nothing to hide. Let's just tell everybody. So we did that. And then obviously we had children. And so we had fertility treatment, and it was, well, we better tell those people what our situation is. And you meet people in that circle, and then you're coming out saying, oh, well, it's not because I've not got my sperm's bad, it's just I haven't got any. So it's kind of a constant bit of coming out. So that relief of kind of just people accepting you as the more I've done it, the easier it's got, and I've had more positive response than I have had negative. So it's kind of just built my confidence that the shame that I built up at the beginning as a child It's just got less and less and less. So, like, I guess my most recent coming out was coming out in my workplace, which had been there for 9 years. It's a very male-dominated world. I work in construction, and I guess I joined the company, but I didn't sort of express I was transgender at the beginning. Started as a trainee, didn't think much of myself, didn't really think I'd be anybody in this business. Thought I'd just be, a low-level job that I just got a job, thank God. And over the time, I've built some really trusting relationships and built that kind of confidence to come out to people and say, this is who I am. And again, the response has been amazing in a really male-dominated world. So it's just finding those nuggets of bravery each step and then continuing to come out. So yeah, it's just growing stronger and stronger. I don't know the opposite word of shame, but it's squashing the shame, and whatever the opposite word of shame is, it's just getting better, bigger and bigger, the confidence in me to be more open and out.
It's an interesting concept I feel with coming out, and recently in episodes that have just launched, or by the time this comes out, it would have been a fair while away, but I had David Keck come on from the US and share his story of coming out as gay. And we talked about like this notion of coming out, and do you think we'll ever get to a space where it's not necessary to come out because it is just what it is? Do you feel like coming out was such a big thing for you? For David, it wasn't. It was actually quite the opposite. He was like, oh yeah, it is what it is. But for you, was this like a big emotional roller coaster for you to keep coming out in these ways?
I think it was a big thing for where it matters, if that makes sense. So my family, it absolutely mattered because I was going to make some very big physiological changes. That was my intention. There was never a doubt that I would want to take hormones and have surgery. So that is a huge emotional roller coaster for anybody, to see a child physiologically change, but obviously mind, body and soul is the same. It's probably for my mums, and I have to ask her, but a very unique experience to go through. And the same obviously for my wife. I think that aspect of coming out was really important to me because that was my life. That was my, the core part of my family. And if they couldn't accept me, that would have been a major problem in my life. And then I think about the friends that supported me through other aspects of my identity. And I think, well, they're really meaningful people to me too. And it's coming out for me, but it's also coming out for them because I want to be open and honest. I really believe in being open and honest with my own children. So I want that with them. I don't want any secrets, and I don't want people to assume certain things about my life because, as I mentioned, I don't have sperm, but lots of people assume that my kids are mine. They don't understand there's a donor there, and that's my kid's story. So there's other aspects maybe that are maybe slightly different, that mean coming out to me kind of unlocks a whole host of truth. I don't really have to kind of skirt around things. Don't get me wrong, certainly in public and total strangers, I don't come out to everybody and anybody. But my workplace was probably, I've been there, like I said, 9 years, and that was a huge part of my life. I'd kind of gone from boy to man in that workplace. And it wasn't like I owed them anything, but it was more, I spent a lot of time here at work. It's a 9-to-5 job. I mean, if I can't be honest with these people who I've grown up with, then what am I doing? What does that say about me? So I felt compelled to do that for me, but also for other people in that industry or other people that are transgender. It's a massive talking point at the moment in the world. So, like I said, I never really had a role model growing up. So it really felt like I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit there in my idyllic world where I'm married and I have kids and I have a great job and things are going well for me. I've had my struggles and I've overcome them. Kind of felt like in a privileged place, and that didn't sit easy with me. It's great to be there, but it felt like I needed to dive straight back into, actually, there were other kids going through the system now, but it would be me when I was 5, 6, 7 plus that are sinking and they need to hang on. And I kind of wanted to sort of dive back into that. Coming out was kind of like gone straight back to the beginning almost of helping other people with that.
When you did come out, in these various stages of your life, did you lose friends or loved ones who couldn't accept that?
I was very canny with my friends and social circles. So, well, when I think about when I came out, yeah, there were definitely some people, I was a teenager, there were definitely some people that were just not interested. It was almost like too much for them too much drama. Maybe they were like, I just want to go out, drink, I want to have fun. And that's too serious. And I think that was probably hard, but I'm not entirely surprised by it. But I kept my circle of friends quite small, I suppose. So the people that I kind of knew were going to accept it, I knew were going to be okay with it. The people on the periphery wasn't a surprise, and it wasn't a huge loss. I think in my school from primary and secondary, I didn't really have many friends. That was kind of my survival technique, to just hide in the shadows, don't get attached to people, don't bring people along on the journey because you're going to change at some point. And so I'd go to school as a female and I'd come home and I'd be male. I never really blurred the two lines because I just didn't believe that any of them were true friends. They were just people at school. So yeah, I detached myself a lot from people, and I'm very good at doing that. Trying to learn the opposite way now, actually not detaching myself from people, actually building meaningful relationships is a skill I think I've learned a bit later on in life.
I'm interested now to explore like you, I guess, coming out, but also going, you know what, I'm going to do this full time. I'm no longer going to hide this. I'm no longer going to just, do it in a certain part of the day or, like after school, for example. Like I'm actually going to do this full time. Like what was that moment like? And can you explore or share with us, like what happened in your life to do that?
Yeah, so the turning point for me was my kids. So right before my kids came along, I was like, I'm sure as many parents, I was panicking like that. I was not going to be the best person. I had to be better. I went for a little bit of therapy, a couple of sessions, just to kind of go through, like, is there anything here, that any hang-ups in my history that I just need to get rid of? And it kind of all boiled down to probably the first 2 years of my daughter's life, and obviously COVID happened somewhere in and around that it wasn't really about me being the best that I can be as such. It was more, just wasn't being honest with myself. I was good enough as I was. I just wasn't being honest with myself about who I was. And because I wasn't being honest with myself, I wasn't really going to show my daughter or my son how to be a good role model, how to be honest with themselves. I'm going to preach to them something that I'm not really doing myself. So yeah, when my kids came along, that was kind of the turning point of, right, well, yeah, the mind just changed. I don't know what happened in my brain. Something went off in my brain to kind of go, yeah, you need to start acknowledging your adoption a bit more and questioning that a bit more. I don't mean questioning in terms of like I've been lied to, but questioning as in, as an adult, not a child, but as an adult, what does that story really make you feel like? What happened in that story is a heck of a story. How do I feel about that as an adult? And with the gender side of things, it was about, well, I want to be able to stand in front of my kids and say that I'm transgender, and then go, yeah, heck yeah, that's cool. I respect that, rather than them being ashamed of me, because that would be the worst. And the only way to do that would be to be proud of who I am. And whilst I was proud of who I wasn't, outwardly saying it in my circle. Yeah, everybody knew I was dead proud of being trans, dead proud of the journey I'd gone on. So that kind of led me to do a TED Talk, as you do. So in doing that, it kind of spiraled to kind of just, yeah, I delivered a speech as a 7-year-old and then a school nativity, to suddenly doing a TED Talk. And the kind people at TED Talk were just like, let's give this guy a go, let's give him a chance. And by working with them to kind of talk about my identity and talk about what that meant to me and explore that and kind of put that to words, was kind of like the turning point of, right, well, I've conceived this idea that I now need to be more outwardly spoken, to actually standing on the stage and doing it. And I'm forever grateful for the support and the people that were there, because they didn't have to. Lots of TED people pick people where they're seasoned speakers, and they didn't do that. They kind of just saw something in the story and thought, this guy needs to share this. And it was a huge turning point.
This is why I do podcasting, actually, to share these stories. I'm not quite up there with the TEDx scene, but to share stories to help guys to search inwards and go, you know what? Question, like, I love that word question, actually. Question their upbringing or what they're feeling inside, their identity. Are they trans? Are they gay? Are they heterosexual, but they're just questioning why they believe certain beliefs or why their values are a certain way. And so I find that sharing stories is really an empowering thing for those of us sharing, but then also inspiring for those of us listening as well. Since coming out and saying, yes, I'm a trans man, and doing the TEDx talk, I guess, have you heard of, random stories from around the world of people that you've inspired as well?
Probably won't go as far to say random stories around the world. I'm sure maybe there is. I don't know. I think straight after the event, there were people that came up to me and said amazing things, and how what I'd said had kind of like really resonated with them, either because they were trans, and they came out to me and told me that, or that, they were adopted. There was a table of 2 people actually who came over, and one was adopted and one was trans, and they were like, I couldn't believe in that talk. You covered 2 massive aspects for us, and they were both like holding each other's hands, crying through it, because it was just meant a lot to them, because I talk about intersectionality as well. And I guess more recently, like I've had messages from friends of friends who've said, I've just watched, this Carlos's TED Talk, and it's made me really question my life. And while they didn't relate to anything that I actually talked about, it made them question their identity and whatever that meant to them. So yeah, it's made a big difference to clearly some people. And I think just in generally sharing it around my workplace or with other friends, it's helped them understand a little bit more about who I am and why I am the way I am. And I think that's just massively helped my work and personal life.
I'm interested to hear about your wife for a moment. We all have our rocks in the world. My wife is my rock as well. And I'd love to hear about, because you said you met when you were quite young, like in your teenage years or so, when you were young. Tell us about that journey of that relationship blossoming and the support that she's provided to you along your journey.
Sure. So I always say that my mum helped me survive and my wife helped me thrive. And it's as straightforward as that. Literally, my mum kept me hanging on just enough to take each day as it came, because that was a very, very dark place to come from. And then suddenly this girl walks in, and the light shines. And so we met when we were 15, 16, party, as you do. I've never really looked back. She's kind of always been accepting before she even knew I was transgender. I wasn't the coolest person in the world, but she just was obviously easy to talk about important topics. We had similar aspirations in life. We didn't necessarily come from a really privileged background. So we kind of really had once we got our heads together, we really had the same aspirations for kind of building something that was, a strong family unit where we're, doing jobs or changing lives. Kind of, she works as a therapist and she just really wanted to help people. So yeah, all along she's been kind of there. So when I didn't believe I could go to university, she went to university before I did, and she's a year younger than me. And she was like, Carlos, you can do that. And I was like, hang on. Yeah, I can do that. If you can do it, I can do it. So she kind of pulled me up a little bit by my boots and was like, you know what, you can do it. So she kind of has always kind of just showed me the way. And even obviously into having sort of children, she's a most magnificent mother. And it's like, I'd always seen that. It's kind of, we've just both grown into our roles as parents now. And it works. We're a proper tag team.
It's important to have that tag team next to you, or the person you can tag out when you need to, particularly as a parent, but tag into as well when you need to go into bat as well. It's really important having those rocks in our world where we can lean on. But I'm interested now, the transition from female to male, is that a thing for you? Did you go through any process of physical change, or is it more purely just the identity change?
Yeah, so I started off with the identity or the social transitioning. So I guess my very first point at which I came out as Carlos, I was in Chester. Picture the most British city you can, with Tudor buildings and cobble streets. I was in a city called Chester, and there was buskers doing panpipes in the streets. And I'd go, because I was a total loner, I'd go and kind of watch them from one of the shops and just listen to them, because they were Peruvian, they were panpipers. I could relate to that, and I was kind of I was getting something from that experience. And I just decided one day I was going to go down and sit on the benches near them. And they came over to me because obviously they could see I was Peruvian. This is where the two identities crossed over. And they said to me, "What's your name?" And in that moment, I just said Carlos. And that was the very first time I said to anybody who I was. I felt obviously comfortable in my own skin in that moment and at peace with something that I said I was Carlos. And they went, "All right, cool, mate. Okay, come over and talk to us." And they talked to me about their musical instruments and everything else. And I never really looked back after that. That was kind of I'd been in such a dark place, in a dark hole. And then as soon as I just did that, it was a slight glimmer of light, and that light just got bigger and bigger. And I started to socially transition with more and more people that I'd met. So I met people of people, and friends of friends. And that network of people who knew me as Carlos just grew. And then obviously at a certain point in my life as a teenager, there's only a certain age in England where you can medically transition. When I could, I did. And then obviously there was a bit of a wait list. So it wasn't like we just rushed into it. There was a lot of conversations with my family or my mum about what that was going to be like. But eventually when it did happen and I started taking hormones, that was a whole experience that I couldn't have even expected in all the best possible ways. Because I remember I said I just didn't really see what, if I was ever going to be a boy, I just couldn't work out what that was going to look like, how that was going to be possible. And when I realised NHS could help us and do something for me, and give me hormones. And that just every month was kind of like looking at your face. Is there a hair? You were looking at kind of like your arms and they're getting more muscular. When I wouldn't have a phone call previously, I was very nervous on a phone. Actually, I could hear my voice and it was more affirming of the gender that I wanted to be. And every month turned into kind of like, well, every few months, and before long, years pass by and you kind of, that obsession of checking kind of disappears. But at the beginning, it's like, yes, I'm getting a testosterone injection, and you'd be obsessed with it. And then, yeah, I think after maybe like a couple of years or a year or so of testosterone, then I started to have surgery. Yeah, that's something that I've always wanted. It wasn't something that I kind of just decided right back then and there. I think it's something I've always wanted. And when I'd have consultations with the specialists and they go through a big, vigorous checklist of everything, I always expressed that's what I wanted. So it was always on their radar. So when the opportunity came up, I took it. Again, that was something where I've been in such discomfort binding my chest that to suddenly not have to do that was incredibly freeing. So to wear a white t-shirt to go swimming, although it took me a number of years to go swimming where I wasn't really conscious of the scars, it was just really, really freeing, particularly for, like going on holiday. Before that, I would wear like a jumper and in like 30 degrees because I was so like afraid of what people would think of my chest. So it was just like a whole new experience of being a man and kind of just being more free with it rather than kind of like having to hide it and kind of just assuming people will think I'm a man.
That's quite full on. You're talking about injections, you're talking about surgery. Like, I mean, you paint it as a very positive thing, but was there a moment where you're like, what am I doing? Or was there a moment where things weren't quite going so right that you're really questioning the process?
No, not at all. It sounds very drastic, and I get that. If someone was to say to me as like as a 7-year-old, like, well, if you want to be a boy, this is what it means. Yeah, I'd probably be really like, oh my gosh. But at the same time, if that's what I have to do, then that's what I have to do. That was kind of my mentality through it. Don't get me wrong. When I'd had surgeries and I was kind of like, having resting up in bed and just couldn't move, and all my friends were out doing amazing things with their lives, and I was kind of just, my life stood still for X amount of weeks. I was like, why me? Like, this is not fair. It wasn't like a negative mindset of, I wish I'd never done it. It was more like a, why me that I've got to go through this to get where I want to be. But yeah, all through it, some of the surgeries were incredibly painful. Some of the surgeries had complications. But I always set my mindset of, well, whatever happens, we'll take it one step ahead. Well, we'll get there eventually. And it took 6 or 7 years. So I look back now and it feels like a small snapshot of my life. But in that moment, it's the longest week of your life when you're in pain and you're thinking, God, what am I doing to become a man? Like, this is just horrendous that I have to do this. But once I'd healed up and once I'd, been discharged and it was all okay, would do it all over again if I had to.
It's an amazing story. It's really interesting to hear and explore it because it's not just as simple as one day saying that you're a guy. This is, for you, a lifetime process of identifying from a very young age, like 5 years old. My daughter's 4, my son's 7. Like, some of the things that they come out with, I'm like, where did you even come out with this thing? Like, it's amazing how the young brain works. But then to sit with that and persist and persist and persist to the point where now you can say that you're full-blown bloke. Must be an amazing thing. And I'm interested because I've got the Mindful Men Facebook community, which is a free community for anyone listening to come in and talk about mindfulness and connect with other guys around the world. And I always ask this question in this when a new person comes into the community and say, what does it mean to be a mindful man? So I'm going to ask that question to you. What does it mean to be a mindful man and just to be a man?
Oh, that's a good question. I wish you'd asked me that before. I guess for me as a parent now, it probably means something different to me than when I was transitioning. If you'd asked me when I was transitioning to be a man, it was all the kind of the stuff that on the periphery, like having cool hair and having a beard, which I don't have because I can't grow one. My ethnicity will not allow me.
Don't worry, you're not the only person in this room that cannot grow a beard. So.
Yeah, it's all that kind of stuff because obviously that's the bit that the gender dysphoria comes from. So if you'd asked me as a teenager, maybe it'd be all about those things, what it is to be a man. And I was longing for, now that I have all of those things, I have people in my life to call me my husband, or I have people in my life to call me dad. Being a man has kind of changed now, and now I look at it more as just being the best person that I can be. It really doesn't really come down to whether I'm a man or not a man. It's really just about being the best person, and if that means that I have to do all the DIY in the house, or I have to be the worst at cooking in the house and the most messy, or whatever kind of traits men have. It's just about being the best person for me. I don't see many good male role models around, if I'm honest. And that's probably because I'm not having the right conversations with people. But the few conversations that I have had with people who are great role models, they're men who are compassionate, they're men who can reflect, they're men who are, truly care about the people in their lives and want the best for them. And those are all the traits that I have for my own family. And if that's what makes me a good man, then I'll take that.
That's great. I want to extend that question to now. I love a good dad chat. Like, what does it mean to be a dad to you?
Getting up at 2 a.m. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, as a dad, and a very, very proud one of that, I just want my kids to be happy. And if I can make my kids happy, then I'm doing something right. And if I'm not, then I've got to check myself. I've got to look at what it is I'm doing. And I'm obviously not being the best person or the best dad that I can be. My kids, when they laugh and I get to spend time with them and prioritize my time with them, because they're only little for a short period of time, very aware of that, then I know I'm doing the right thing as a dad. So I think it's carving out that time.
Great answers. The highlight. I love asking guys those definitions to hear from their perspective what it means to be a man or a mindful man. I'm all about mindfulness, be a dad. The goal that comes out with that, and I think you just summed it up really nicely, is just be the best person you can be. It doesn't matter what your identity or sexuality is or gender, religion, whatever it is, just be the best person that you can be and just try to make your kids happy at 2 o'clock in the morning. if that's the whatever time that needs to be. But Carlos, I'm really enjoying this conversation. I could talk to you for another 6 hours, but I won't do that because I am mindful that it is pretty late over there for you. A couple more questions, I'll let you go. I'm interested in, given your story around your gender and becoming a trans man and ultimately a dad as well. Like, if there's somebody else who's listening to this and they're not sure where to start, they're questioning their gender identity, they're not sure where to start, where can you point them in the right direction so that they can maybe start learning a bit more or asking questions from a practitioner? Or is there a role model out there like yourself who they can maybe watch something on YouTube or something like that? Where can they turn?
As I say, like when I grew up, and that was like the 90s, YouTube was kind of in its infancy. There's a plethora of role models on YouTube. All you have to search for is transgender men or transgender women or non-binary people. And there are a plethora of people out there that are prepared, brave enough and willing to share their story. And they will share that from what transgender means to them right through to their experiences of hormones, diaries of what that entails, so that you can kind of have an idea up front in advance what that's going to look like. And obviously surgeries. YouTube, I think I followed 1 or 2 people at a time. They no longer do that, but they were in America. And just having that little bit of kind of an idea as a teenager was just enough for me to kind of see a little bit of hope. So yeah, 100% people who are questioning their gender, YouTube is a great tool to go on to. To be fair, social media, again, there's Instagram, there's TikTok, there are lots of people on there. There are definitely, wherever you are in the world, there are charities, organisations. I mean, in London, if anybody listening in England, there is Trans in the City. There is My Gender G Work, if it's about your workplace. There is the LGBT Foundation. There's Butterflies. There's so many in the UK. I'm fairly certain wherever you are in the world, there'll be the same sort of organisation. So if you do a Google search for those charities in your country, they'll be there. There are a lot of people advocating for people who are transgender and who really want to help. And it's all about accessing that knowledge and that community. The community wasn't there when I grew up. There was definitely a community now that's there to help.
You mentioned social media. It's quite a powerful tool. I remember when I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder in 2012 and felt like I was the only person in the world to ever experience OCD. Turns out I wasn't. But it really took another 8 or so years, 10 years later, when through Instagram, actually, I discovered an OCD community. I never met anybody else who had shared that they were OCD. And that felt empowering in itself. It felt like I was no longer alone in the world. I felt like there was other people who understood how my brain worked. And so I started connecting. And as you say, the power of social media, YouTube these days, is we can find those role models if those role models are missing from our very own actual community, our geographical community. So if anyone's listening and they want to follow you, are you on the socials, or is there a way that people can follow you? I'll put the link to the TEDx talk into the show notes, but are you available on other social media platforms?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. If anybody wants to search for me on LinkedIn, I'm sure I'll give you the tag for that. I've got an Instagram account that I've just set up, so I think I've done a couple of articles in there. So there'll be things on Instagram where you can follow me on. And I think the great thing about social media is if you follow one person who's trans and you get that content, it goes on to somebody else who's trans. And that's how I found my community. By following one person, you follow another, and you find out what organization they're from. And then you see in that organization, there are other leaders and activists and role models, and you follow those people. Yeah, social media's probably got its flaws, and I'd love to say, I'd go to your GP and speak to them. I know for some people that they've not had the best experience doing that. For me, my GP was fantastic, and maybe that's the best protocol for some people who social media is not the right way to do it. I don't know about your experience in OCD and your sort of your doctors over there, but mine was fantastic. And yeah, fingers crossed if you do go to your GP and are brave enough to kind of say who you are, how you feel about something, that they can point you in the right direction. Because when I did that, I was pointed in to the gender identity clinic, which was the right direction to be sort of pointed to. And that's where suddenly things started to change for the better for me. So for actual action, yeah, maybe go to your GP. But a lot of the people on social media and the organizations will probably tell you the right route if you want to take action.
Yeah, and often when you do, as you said before, like when you connect with someone on social media, whether you're following them, that sometimes connects in or starts following charities or educational resources as well, which I've started to see as well through my OCD journey as well, which has prompted me to find specific therapy for OCD or specific specialist support for that. So it can just go more broader than people dancing in front of things or sharing in front of the video. There's to actual education and, as you're right, the right pathway to change and to grow and to heal and to thrive, as you said before, with your wife. So Carlos, thanks so much for sharing all of that. We do get into some pretty heavy topics on this show, so I always like to leave the last question on something a little bit lighter. Not that this has been a really dark and scary conversation, it's actually been really insightful, but I like to ask all of my guests to finish off the show by plugging something that's making them feel good at the moment. And that can be absolutely anything. It could be something you're eating, something you're watching on telly, something that you're listening to on the radio. I'd like to say sport, but my team's on the bottom of the AFL ladder. But yeah, like what's lighting you up at the moment?
You said sport, actually, so I feel like I have to say something to do with sport. My team is a team called Bolton Wanderers. They were a Premiership team here in England. They were in the Premiership. They went down to the Championship, then they went down to League One, then they went down to League Two. And it's been a painful process watching them slowly climb up. But they might have a clutching at straws, but they may have a chance of being promoted this year. Following that, over the next 4 games they've got left, 3 games, I'm feeling pretty positive and optimistic about that. So I've got my fingers crossed that I might actually start to see my team on the TV for once.
As you were saying that, it reminded me, over here on Netflix, I'm not sure what it's like over there, there's the show about Sunderland and their demise, and so maybe has Bolton got a Netflix show coming up about, so we could share in that journey for them rising up to the Premier League again?
It doesn't, and I really wish it did. It's a bit like Wrexham when they got took over by the 2 Hollywood stars. Like, I don't think Bolton's quite that glamorous that it's been afforded that opportunity. So no, sadly not. I mean, you'd have to read the local Bolton news, I think, to get the full story. Their Instagram, to be fair, I found them on Instagram. I would never normally have gone there, but obviously social media taken off, and I'm being more active in it. And yeah, when I watch them on social media, it's a whole host of glory videos and optimism and hype going on around the fact that they may get promoted. And I have friends who've got teams who are in the same league that these guys at Bolton are going to get promoted to, hopefully. And so that lies with, right, well, there's going to be some good rivalry and some good chats and conversation around, well, now we're in the same league, so we can start to watch the games together. We can start to, so it's, if they get through, I'll be buzzing. is what we say in England.
Awesome. I love it so much. But Carlos, thanks again for coming on the show. Really have enjoyed our conversation. Appreciated your time. And yeah, thanks for being part now of the Mindful Men community.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this chat too. So thanks.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode, and I hope you got some value from it. If anything triggered your mental health today, please reach out to your support networks. Also, if you loved what you heard, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with your mates. For more from Mindful Men, you can check us out on Instagram and YouTube, and I'll throw the links to these pages in the show notes below. But until next time, stay mindful.